Hi, welcome everyone to White Women Wake Up. We are Karen and Jonelle, a mother and daughter duo who love to have real, unfiltered conversations about our journeys with privilege, bias, and just our overall growth. So one of us doesn't know the topic, as always, so you'll hear some genuine, off-the-cuff reactions, just like you would with your family and friends. So welcome, everyone. Karen, how are you doing today?
I'm good. I was listening to our podcast last week and I realized we didn't give each other homework.
I'm okay with that.
That's okay. Anyways,
Sometime.
I think I'm still on the podcast from before. I think it was like, if last week was, I don't know,
White
12
exhaustion
or whatever. What?
You're on white
The
exhaustion.
white exhaustion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's fair. That's still a big topic.
I have to say, the news has been so overwhelming. I found myself getting incredibly defensive.
Yeah.
And I was watching my reaction to my defensiveness. And I go in with this kind of language of rage. And then I shut down.
Oh.
And so
that's
it
interesting.
made me think about this conversation that we had with white exhaustion. And so I started going on a tangent of, white defensiveness and what does it mean when we're white defense and, or we have defensiveness. And it actually stems from a little bit of a different kind of defensiveness, but it made me start thinking. So I love this. I love this title because it speaks to me so well. So Robin DiAngelo called it like white fragility.
Okay.
But I'm calling it the discomfort cycle.
Oh,
and the
okay.
reason I'm calling it the discomfort cycle is because it really, truly labels it for me. And you know me, I hate to be uncomfortable.
I think I don't think that you're alone with most people, but I also think it's a white thing. It's our fellow white people. We all don't like to be discomfort.
So have you ever found yourself being defensive if someone has challenged you on your point of view of, say, race, sexism, disabilities? Have you found yourself defensive? And can you give me a little anecdote of that?
Well, yeah. I mean, I think I've talked about this before in the sense that when I have conversations with strangers or other people, I can have this kind of open perspective of trying to hear their side and not just trying to teach and push my side.
Yeah.
But when it comes to family members, and friends too a little bit, but mostly family members, I can really spark defensiveness of comments that are done. And I think there's so much with family that you feel like they should be an extension of you. And so when some of these opinions that are so different than mine come out, I can really kind of come off and really start honing in on my opinion because I'm just like, how can you think like that? Like, how are we so far off with this?
Yeah. So it's interesting, this discomfort cycle, it's exactly what you're talking about. It's like a reoccurring pattern when we're confronted with biases, whether it's racism, sexism, xenophobia, any of these biases, disabilities, and so forth. So breaking it down, there's almost a common cycle they go through. So the first thing is we can feel shame. So I was looking up research on defensiveness. So for example, we might feel shame when someone brings up a topic about xenophobia or something like that, like we don't understand someone else's culture. We feel bad because we didn't recognize that we may have had a bias around it to begin with. So there's a little bit of a shame. I remember in one of the hiring processes I did years back, this person really called out how my religious background brought up so many issues of being complicit with slavery.
Oh.
And I felt so shamed. I felt so much shame around this that it made me really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So then,
before you continue, can kind of ask.
Shame.
Not in shame. I kind of want to understand where you're going with this. Let me get my question out. So when you talk about a discomfort cycle, because you started talking about white exhaustion.
Yeah.
And so to me, I see that as a much larger cycle at play. But then now we moved from a conversation of defensiveness, which to me sounds like a shorter cycle of discomfort. So are you saying they're both similar cycles, just different time frame? Like, I kind of want to understand that a little bit more where we go into this.
So what I'm understanding is this discomfort cycle is there's shame, denial, kind of anger reaction, and then apathy.
Okay.
So the apathy is the end result where we feel exhausted.
Yeah.
So this is what I was trying to say earlier is I found myself defensive, and it was around some government issues. I found myself getting angry. Well, first of all, I was in denial that this could even happen. Then, and I also had some shame, like, how the heck am I going to speak into this? Like, this is ridiculous, right? And then I found myself getting angry, and then I found myself saying, well, actually, I went and straight and had ice cream because I was so apathetic, like I have no control over anything.
Yeah.
When I was eating the ice cream, I started thinking about our conversation about white exhaustion, like screw it. Just screw it. It's overwhelming. Screw it. So then so that's how I connected the two. Like, what are we talking about? How am I entering into the story or this space? And I thought, and then it made me think about that hiring cycle that I had with that person where I started with feeling a lot of shame. When they called out a situation that was definitely part of my white culture, I felt a lot of shame around it because I didn't notice it. Kind of like when you brought up the other day, there was something that your friend brought up that you hadn't felt. You were talking about a story about your friend holding hands in public. They're queer, and you hadn't even thought about it, and it felt bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You misinterpreted it. That's very different. I didn't feel shame around calling it out.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say
it's a pretty big
I was about to say, I don't think I would have. I felt bad for me coming in strong to the conversation without thinking about her perspective.
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting the way you bring up shame. It made me start thinking about, I think shame comes from a place when we also don't understand where the other person's coming from.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think most people intend to shame. And so,
part of
it's interesting. So continue with the cycle.
Which is so fascinating. I started looking more into these kind of cycles of why we become defensive. One of which is we feel the shame. Second is we actually start shifting the blame, like, well, it's their fault, or they brought this up, or it's theirs. So there's kind of a denial, like, I'm not really like that. Yes, that might be my religion, but I'm not like that. Then, and I get this personally, I then feel like it's an attack on my own self-worth. Like, it leads to a little bit of identity crisis, like, oh my gosh, am I aligning with these people? Am I thinking the way that they're thinking?
Yeah.
I never thought I thought that way. Yeah. I thought I was very different. Then I get angry. And I can get angry really comfortably. And I get angry like, gosh darn it, who didn't taught me this? How did I step into this? Why am I even having this story? Why am I even part of it? And then I tend to lash out.
To be fair, listeners, she doesn't say "gosh darn it." Yeah, it was just censored.
I swear a lot
for you.
Yeah.
She wasn't as
I usually
polite anger.
There's a lot of little swearing, but I'm really good. And so I was going through this cycle in my own world around politics that I realized just the defensiveness. And I know white defensiveness has been a topic, so I kind of wanted to bring these two together. And then I went to apathy. After you get angry, you get reaction. The conversation is so big, I just went to apathy. So I did more research about what the heck do you do with all this? So what about you? When you do you see yourself falling in this cycle?
That is an interesting question. And
remember, we don't bring this up in advance, so we're just kind of...
It is funny. I did have a friend the other day who, this is a side note, who commented and she was like, I just couldn't imagine doing what you're doing simply because I don't know how I'd respond. I don't know how to form a thought bubble.
So the way I thought about
every
this
time.
initially is I thought about the spaces in which I'm angry and defensive.
Mm.
So I kind of went back and up and then through it.
No, I understand what you're saying. I think the thing is, what I want to say sounds arrogant, and I don't think people understand. I don't think I often go through. I don't really go through those cycles often with a lot of things. Defensiveness and anger are not my MO in life. I've always come, and you know this about me, I always come from really multiple perspectives of things. So I'm really good at being able to really see other people's perspectives. That being said, I do, as I said this, when it comes to family members, I don't know why my entire personality of calm and understanding goes out the door. So I will say that this cycle comes up much more often with family members than it does to anyone else in my life.
The way I define defensiveness, and I'm going to call you on this because I've seen you be defensive, is trying to prove your point or trying to
with family members.
Yeah, well, I've seen it with friends too. So anyway,
I mean, maybe, but people that I'm,
Yeah. So, and the reason I'm using defensiveness is I just witnessed it in national TV with our government.
Yeah.
And this person was being incredibly defensive and not allowing the other person to have their point of view. And then it moved to anger. Yeah.
No, I mean, and I get what you're saying. I guess where you're right. The defensiveness comes down because I guess I'm more the anger part is where I don't go to.
Yeah,
and you know me.
Really
I don't go to anger. No. If I don't get my point across, I don't go to anger.
But you do go to reactionary action. You do often you're not angry about it, but you do step into the conversation.
But I think the point that I'm trying to make that you don't understand, I'm actually not being defensive. I think it comes across as being defensive. I'm trying to get people to do exactly what I'm doing, which is seeing both sides.
Okay, got it.
And so that's where I don't really view it as defensive, but I can see how externally it might come across.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to get people, the reason I put in my point in is not because I want them to come to my point, which I think is what defensiveness does.
Yes.
Defensive wants them. I don't want them to come to my point. I just want them to validate that my point exists. And I think often people don't do that in conversations.
Yeah.
And so in my mind, though, a healthy conversation starts when you can validate where both people are coming from. And so that's where I think you think I'm coming off as defensive.
So this is interesting. That's a way then that helps you not become defensive.
Yeah.
Let me ask you a question then. When you do this, do you move to a level of apathy? So let's say nothing got resolved from the conversation.
No, this is where again I think I'm different, and that's why I was having a hard time responding because it sounds arrogant. No, you know me, I move to action. Apathy is not really a term that happens often.
Would not be part of it.
No, I am a justice fighter through and through, and so I don't move to apathy. I think what's interesting in my older age, as I've gracefully aged, I've learned more though that like I actually have to step back. I never step back to apathy, but I do have to step back from action because there are some things that are circular spaces that you will waste so much time and energy pushing where it's not going to grow. And this goes back to my point of I've really started to hone in on instead of pushing my point on people. And now again, my brother out there, if he ever listens to us, will be like, that's not true. But again, family aside, I've really learned about like, I still try to push my point to a extent because I want to start off on a level ground of we both understand each other. That's my intention. But I have learned if I don't see that, I know there's no room in this conversation for growth. And so I do walk away, but not in an apathetic way, in a more, there's not time for action right now.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you can't go back to action, but there's no time. But in my mind, there's always action. I mean, you know that.
This is so interesting because I live, and it could be my generation, I live in a perpetual state of discomfort. And so one of the things that they were saying too is this kind of fear of being bad. So if I say what I want or I jump into that space or I realize my bias didn't align to other people, I feel bad or I feel wrong.
Yeah.
So that's a language of discomfort. Or I feel guilt. Like, how the heck did I not have this understanding before? I feel so guilty that I didn't work hard enough to understand it. Or I feel conflict. Like, one of the things I think that even started our interest in this, or you encouraged me, is you are able to walk with a comfort around conflict. And I have never felt comfortable with conflict. The middle child, conflict is always difficult for me.
Yeah.
And so all of these spaces make me feel very fragile. And that shut me down.
Which is interesting. And I don't think it's just your generation. I do think I'm the weird one out here. I do think, I don't know, my brain is wired differently, but I'm always someone who sees that progress and action can always happen. I think when I was younger, back to the defensiveness, I think I used to push it because I wanted that happening. But as I've learned, I now can tread in and out of spaces of progress and see, like, okay, and I can almost put it aside. Yeah. It's not apathy, but like, that space or that conversation is not ready for progress right now. I'm going to move on to this space.
So one way you avoid it is a little bit of a compartmentalizing on topics, maybe?
Maybe, but
because I do think this is one of the, because I really this week really tried to work on why am I going from defensiveness, anger to apathy? And every time I listen to the news, I'm really defensive, I'm really angry, and then I shut down and I eat ice cream. So it's, I know. And so it's like, so I'm trying to figure out, and I liked this language of the discomfort cycle because all of it brings me in this space of discomfort.
And I'm not saying, and you're right, and I'm not saying, like, I'm really trying to be clear. I don't think I'm like this guru of amazingness here. I just, my mind always goes to action. It's always gone to action. It's gone to making lists. It's gone to, doing tangible things that we could also maybe say, maybe I'm avoiding the discomfort by doing action. Like, I'm not saying my way is perfect, but I don't often fit into this cycle. And it doesn't mean I don't get exhausted, but I get exhausted, and my way to get out of exhaustion is action.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how my brain is wired. And so it's interesting.
Yeah.
One more thing. As you say, starting this podcast, I was talking to a friend like 2 nights ago, and she reminded me of kind of the week after the election and why we started this podcast and how exhausted and frustrated I was. And it was a good reminder because that is a space that I rarely sit in, and Steph very rarely sit into that, where I feel lost and there's nothing I can possibly do to take action.
Yeah.
And so And so that is where this bigger sense of action, the podcast came from. Yeah. So I think this is what I'm saying within these cycles. I still don't go to apathy. Yeah. I can feel lost and tired, but I don't often go to apathy.
Well, so we need to keep hearing from you. And one of the things
that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm not.
One of the things that I'm hearing from you is you enter a space trying to hear both points of view, and that instead of becoming defensive, which could move to anger, which could then lead to apathy. Yeah. So one of the things that I, again, as I dug deep, is the challenge with this discomfort cycle, which I love that language because it hits every one of my points, is that it stalls my personal growth. Yeah. Because obviously when I become apathetic, I don't want to read more. Yeah. I don't want to listen to more news. I've been really trying to listen to news cycles from different perspectives, not just, this main white stream perspective. And also it can be harmful for others because I'm not learning. Yeah. Like, I like that you said, like, if I enter in, so how do you enter in? Okay, how do you enter in the differing perspective in a news cycle? Because that's what got me angry this week, and that's what led me to ice cream eating and doing nothing. We're going to talk about the apathy as ice cream eating.
Again, That's a really great question.
Do you see it so out of your control that you don't
I think that's it. I think I see
Yeah.
it so out of my control. It kind of goes back to last episode. I think we touched on this when we were talking about homework, about like how can we change the criteria of exhaustion. And to me, changing the criteria was finding where your personal impact was positively affecting your community around you.
Yeah.
And so I do think...
How are you loving on people?
How are you loving on people? And so I do think some of these things... So I'm not saying my way is the right way.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure therapists out there would be like, well, she's being a little like
Denial.
Yeah, she's a little avoidant around this situation. So I'm really not trying to say that. I'm just saying I think I don't go to the anger and the apathy of theirs. I do agree there's people that I would go to the defensiveness, but my intent is always to understand both sides.
Yeah.
And then my intent is still to usually honor the other side.
Yeah.
In like recognizing I like understand that you feel this. Like I understand. But I think so often in our society of white women, and I had something happen recent to me, they take that understanding as passive aggressive, as like a power move, as a... And so
they're not used to being in the conversation.
They're not used to being in the conversation. They're used to being like, women were used to being shut down, and so we have to scream our voice, all of these type of things. And so I'm not saying that it is always a process that works, but but going back to your question on the news cycle, it's not that it doesn't it overwhelms me. It makes me so frustrated. Things that are happening make me so like just confused about how people like I just there's a lot of like things that I don't understand, but I think again how my brain is wired, when I don't understand stuff, it goes immediately into learning and action.
Okay.
So what more can I learn from this? And then what actions can be taken from that?
That's great.
And but I don't know if it's great, because is that what leads more into performative activism? Because I'm doing it to comfort, like to
comfort yourself.
We don't really. This is what I'm saying. A therapist would greatly come in and listen.
I never thought of this language of like when. Again, we're connecting so many weird dots. A therapist would go, "You're nuts." But the thing is, like,
I don't
when
think
we talked about
but...
white exhaustion, I didn't know that white defensiveness led into the white exhaustion.
Yeah.
And white defensiveness comes into this, I feel shame that I didn't know more about my biases.
Yeah.
I feel in denial. Wait, my biases are like lifted up by all my culture. And then I feel, what was the other one I had the list? I feel my self-worth. Like, yes, maybe the people in my culture believe this, but I'm not that way.
Yeah.
And then I react by anger, and then I get frustrated and just eat ice cream. I guess we're probably really good for Ben and Jerry's.
I know.
Right? Okay, but
you sponsor us, Ben and Jerry's.
And the thing is, the other thing that, writing and looking through my notes is when we're not willing to go through the discomfort cycle, we actually then give up early. We give up too early. One of the things that Jonelle and I have done, which is, I got to tell you, we've said we're going to do 52 podcasts, right?
At least a year.
At
We've
least
committed to a year for all of you.
And I was ready to give up this week because it's hard. It's hard to listen. I want to go on a vacation, right?
Yeah.
But
hard to stay in the subject.
And it's hard to keep growing. It's hard to learn.
Okay. So I have a couple, wait, are you done?
Yeah.
I have a couple things I want to unpack from there.
I do have some things that we could work on this.
No, I have a couple things that I want to unpack from that place. Is one, I wanted to talk, going back and talking about shame. So let me tell you the two things I want to talk about so we don't totally lose them.
Yeah.
One, I want to go back to about shame in these conversations and maybe where some of this discomfort and white exhaustion, white defensive comes from. And the second thing is I kind of want to talk about like your exhaustion around the podcast. Those are the two things I want to unpack. Is so as you were starting to talk about like this white defensiveness coming out of this white shame, it did really make me think about the cycles of female conversations and how we are looked at as defensive, and often we are looked at as defensive is because we have to scream our voice and stuff. And so we are so used to pushing and screaming our voice to try to get heard that I see how this cycle can happen in these conversations because we feel not heard and validated. And then we feel, and so this is why, again, I'm trying to go back to the saying of like, we just need to validate each other,
Yeah.
even though if we're not coming from the same place. Like, I hear what you're saying, hear what I am saying.
Yeah.
But we're not used to doing that. And we see that actually as, I think, a little bit of condescending.
And it also takes extra work. So that's
Yeah.
part of the exhaustion.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I hear what you're saying. Can I,
Yes. Yeah. But I also think some people are taking it as condescending or passive aggressive or whatever. But I can see now as you're talking about this, that like filtered cycle of women of we're always feeling like we're not being validated with our feelings. And so we're screaming them, how that leads to anger, and then how that leads to exhaustion, and then how that leads to apathy. Like what you're saying within that whole. So it makes sense of how society as a whole has set up like females in tough conversations.
Yeah. I love what you just said about not being validated, because honestly, when we're talking about people's lives and othering, this is one of the things it says. We need to start normalizing discomfort.
Yeah.
Because maybe how we take a situation can't be validated.
Yeah.
Maybe we've never had that experience, so we really don't know.
Yeah.
So maybe we have to be uncomfortable not being the expert or not even being validated, right?
Yeah.
Well, no, validation.
See, I think validation is still...
But I think, okay, validation is an interesting one.
To me, validation is the first step. And it's not validating that I agree with your point. It's validating that I hear your point. Because I think this is the thing.
I hear what you're saying.
I hear what you're saying. And
but
genuinely
a lot of times
acknowledging.
When people are heated. Well, I agree with you. It's so funny because I'm thinking about this thing I witnessed on TV within the government the other day. And one of the things is the person that was being angry never stopped and said, so I hear what you're saying is. They just kept going. Yeah.
Well, and I do think there has been a trend in society to see our leaders speak in this way. And so people are more apt to speak this way.
Direct without stopping.
Yeah. The second thing, which we did talk about weeks ago, about how in leadership, the white male leadership tends to be bold and aggressive and loud, and how that seems to be then what people want to mimic in order to show strong leadership.
And we also know that, right, if as a woman, maybe a Black woman or a queer woman, if you're bold, loud, then they are condescending.
Yeah.
It's like very hypocritical.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then the second thing I want to unpack, which I think maybe we'll go into your actions, because
I don't know.
I've really confessed to everyone about my very action-oriented mindset, is it's interesting how you were talking about how you were exhausted about the podcast and you didn't want to do it. And I think what's been so brilliant and the gift that the universe has given us with this podcast is when you are tired, I am uplifted. And when I'm exhausted, you are gung-ho.
Yeah.
And I think that kind of ties into why also community, when doing this work, is so important, because no one can be expected to be on top of things all of the time. But if you get the right balance of community who is going to be in with you when you need a break and vice versa, and you can be there to support them, it's amazing how you can still move forward. Because I have to say, a couple weeks ago, when I canceled on a recording session for us, and then you happened to cancel, and I was like, thank goodness. Like, I just wasn't in the space. And then I was feeling guilty that I wasn't in the space. Like, why are we not doing this? But then now I have, like, the last couple of weeks, I've been like, yes, let's go. Like, I am ready. I'm engaged and stuff. And you have, like you said, been a little more lackluster. And I'm like, we got this.
Well, and it's funny. I wasn't until we did the one on white exhaustion. And then I'm like,
oh, no.
Wow, I feel this
self-fulfilling prophecy.
But you know what? I like that you said community. I know we're running out of time here, because I'm going to do a shout out to my sister. My sister and I we have very differing points of view, but we both know we come from a really good space of loving people.
Yes.
But she has been willing to be in these tough conversations with me.
Yes.
And she hasn't run. In the past, we've a little bit like gotten to anger, gotten to frustration, but it's really encouraged me. I even sent her a text the other day saying, thank you for letting me tell you my feelings and you listening to them. And And she's told me things that's made me look. So maybe you're right, because the goal is that we could have healthy conversations with each other. We can learn, because that's the big thing too, is what will this do if we don't give up easily? We engage with our empathy and practice curiosity. We commit to long-term change. Things may change. I know it doesn't feel as impactful as like being, the head of a government, but maybe grassroots may do something. I don't know.
I mean, I don't know. There's a thing, and this is why I love hood feminism so much, because it truly is talking about how, like, well, one, it's talking about how white feminism left behind all their fellow
example, but we
females.
Need to know that.
But what I love about it, because it is talking truly about when you go from the bottom up and you support everyone from the bottom up, you support your small communities, how that can actually grow. And I think so often in the society that we're lived in, we're taught that it needs to be a big splash, a big instance, something huge, something that's taking over. And there are times when that is very needed. Don't get me wrong. We need big shifts, big change. But as you and I, as individuals, there are little shifts and impact that we can do in our day-to-day world that will totally have, hopefully, a ripple effect in a positive way to other parts.
Yeah.
And if we bring everyone up, then hopefully we'll have a better society.
So I have homework for us.
Okay.
As I'm hearing this, I'm like, and it's going back to that exhaustion or apathy. But what I heard you say is often when we can share this in community, share our stories with each other, it will give us enough of a encouragement to go that extra step. And so this week, I want us to look at who we found. Is it someone we talked to in the grocery store? Is it a podcast that we listened to that just gave us just a little bit more energy to keep us going, because we want change.
I mean, I would take it to the next step. I think community.
Well, that's bigger homework.
No, but I think what you're talking about is not necessarily community.
Yeah.
Community is a support system.
Yeah.
Community is a person who's accountable and support you. The person at the grocery store, though you might have one great conversation with them, they're not going to be the continual support to uplift you. Like you and I have this balance that when someone is low, someone else supports.
I see what you're saying.
And so I think community is about
really
identify and find who those people that you can lean on to push through white exhaustion.
Yeah. And the discomfort cycle. I love that word.
You do.
So Jonelle, you've got to read her blog. She's doing so great. She will outline more of what we are calling this discomfort cycle.
No, perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today on White Women Wake Up. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to follow us on social media. We're at White Women Wake Up on all of your social platforms. And just don't forget to visit our blog, as Karen said. And please subscribe. But in the meantime, stay curious, be open, and keep waking up.
Bye.